Hey Ding Dongs, I'm Jamie.
I'm Richard.
And this is Explain It to Jamie, the political comedy podcast brought to you by these two yahoos, in which I, a politically innocent young man from Toronto, Canada, have the complicated political happenings of the world explained to me by my slightly smarter friend, Richard Lamb.
That's right, the other Yahoo. And we research everything on this podcast on Yahoo because it's 2001.
Yeah, that was Google's initial marketing strategy.
For all you kids out there.
The other Yahoo.
That's right.
And now Yahoo is the other Google.
How the tables have turned for Yahoo.
Great. What this week, Richard, I
Yes.
would like you to explain to me the Canadian Senate.
Ooh.
Hard hitting.
I just got a tingle down my spine. I love talking about the Canadian Senate.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Wow.
The same way that I love talking about like the new season of The Walking Dead, where it's like, oh, it's making me so mad. This fucking guy on The Walking Dead drives me crazy.
Right.
Like, that's kind of what the Canadian Senate is.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I know very, very little about the Canadian Senate.
I think that makes you a solid sample of the average Canadian. Though.
I think so. I don't know that it was ever, like, you know, most of some of these topics, as we get into them, I'm like, oh yeah, someone in school once made a concerted effort to explain this to me, but I was full of hormones.
It was a noble battle.
I could not have given
the dry
less
workings
shit.
of Canada's bicameral legislature could not compete with Mary Lou Feldman's thong poking 2 centimeters above the top of her low-rise jeans or whatever.
Lest we forget the thub, as we all called it. But
what a horrible time in all of our lives.
But the point is, I don't actually know that the Canadian Senate was ever explained to me, or that anyone ever made the effort.
Well, get this. I mean, we'll get into it, but a huge part of the Canadian Senate's workings depend on them flying super under the radar so that people don't get mad about how bullshit they are. So that's like definitely not your fault that you don't know anything about it.
Great. Well, that's my reason for choosing this topic, is that I feel like there's a big old blind spot for me in our government that I'm like, I'm pretty sure I get how like House of Commons goes, like with the MPs and the whole deal, but I'm like, how does the Senate fit into that?
Right. Well, this is all good stuff. And you know what? The Senate's going to be pretty relevant, too, because Trudeau is actually trying to reform the Senate, and literally nobody's talking about it. So there's going to be a lot to learn about, a lot to talk about. I, for one, am excited as hell to start talking about the Canadian Senate.
Yeah, I'm also excited.
You said that with an excited tone of voice, but you're bleeding from your eyes.
What are you talking about? I couldn't be more excited.
Jamie, there's a scorpion coming out of your nose and into your mouth.
What? No? I guess I did take a United Airlines trip recently.
Oh!
Let's get it.
Let's play the theme song.
Woo! What a great theme song we have.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's crazy that was just a song that existed on freethemesongs.org.
Yeah, isn't that where we got the name for the podcast?
Yeah, that's right. We were like listening to all these theme songs. We almost called this podcast The Addams Family, but I'm told my lawyer was very insistent that was already a thing. We agreed to disagree on that one. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was me
Learning
snapping
some
my
shit.
fingers.
Learning some shit. Jokes about butts.
Jokes about butts.
Marianne
Tubman.
Marianne.
Oh, great. Okay. The Senate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually we open things up. You ask me what I know about the Senate.
Yes.
And I give you a joke answer.
That's right.
But
Right. Yeah.
I have been trying to think of something to say over the last 2 days.
It's a joke answer about the Senate.
And I literally know so little about the Canadian Senate that I can't make a false a joke about my lack of information with enough conviction that I'm not actually making a joke about something that's real.
That's so funny.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess you could have been like, the Canadian Senate is an Ottawa-based hockey team.
That's where I was.
Yeah,
that's
what you
if
had
you
going
if you
on.
looked at my notebook, that's the first point, and also where I clearly
Lost
had an
interest.
aneurysm and passed out.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, let's just get into it. So, the Canadian Senate is the upper house of the Canadian legislature. Now, many legislatures in the world have two houses, and a two-house legislature is called a bicameral legislature. Most of the governments in the world have two houses in some way. Now, like...
Well, la-dee-da.
Yeah. Now, like the American Senate, the Canadian Senate was created in 1867 alongside the House of Commons as a way to balance out...
During Confederation, yeah?
During Confederation, yeah. It was created in Confederation as a way to balance out like the populism of the House of Commons. So, you know, in the American system, you have Congress, and in Congress, people congressional seats are divided by population, right? So some states have more congressmen than other states, right? But in the American Senate, every state has 2 senators. There's 100 seats in the American Senate. So all the states are equal in the Senate, whereas the population is what makes up the Congress, right? So those two things, the idea between the Congress and the Senate is they balance each other, right? So a majority of people could never force something on a state that they don't want.
Okay,
right?
so now correct me if I'm wrong. From what I'm gathering, that would mean that like MPs represent the people and senators represent or Congress people represent the state? Like the government?
So
Just,
Congress
that's
people
sort of the way I can
represent
justify the
right.
numbers.
So Congress people represent the people in the like riding that they live in. They don't call them ridings in America, but like it's like you have a congressperson who's like for your zone. But there's like, you know, sometimes 3 or 4 congress people. There's many congress people for a city like LA, right? But then the state. So and their job is to represent your interests as a person who lives in that part, whatever that zone is. Then your senator represents your interests statewide. They represent the interests of the entire people of their state. Right? So they have different focuses.
Right. I guess I should have made that example not include 2 different governments. But like
right.
Yeah, like so MPs represent the people in a province, and the senators represent the province, like the people of a province.
That's right.
As a whole.
MPs represent the people in a riding.
Right.
And senators, in theory, represent the people in a province.
Right.
Now, here's the difference. The rules about becoming a senator and who can become a senator and how a senator is chosen come straight from the 19th century to today, completely unaltered. And because of that, it is crazy that we still have this system, because it is a bunch of 19th century gobbledygook that has literally no relevance in our modern society.
Wait, Richard, are you telling me that every decision in Canada made in the 19th century was a bad one?
Jamie, there's a reason that the French call it le siècle des folies.
The death of the French nation.
That's right.
What does that mean?
It means the century of craziness.
Do they actually call that?
No, they don't call it that.
Oh, you're just improvising in French.
Yeah, I was just improvising in French.
Cool.
Like you said. I'm just going to repeat the thing you said.
Yeah.
No,
it's okay.
It's
That's
like...
half of what this podcast is for me.
So, yeah, right. So it's useful to compare it to America. So let's start by comparing it to America. So there are elections for the Senate in America, right? That's part of why the Senate is a really powerful institution in America. You elect your senator. Senate elections are staggered, so it's like every 2 years, half of them are up for re-election, right? There's like the midterm elections, right? So that they never they don't re-elect the whole Senate at the same time as they elect the president. They elect half the Senate every 2 years, and then the other half the other 2 years, right? And because of that, the Senate is a real force in the American government, right? They're accountable to people. You know, senators get kicked out, senators stay on, senators get lobbied really hard, and, you know, legislation can die in the Senate if it doesn't have the approval of the Senate. Right?
Can I guess how they're elected in Canada?
Yes.
Okay, I have 3 guesses.
Go on.
1, the first one to run around a post.
Honestly, that would make more sense than the system that we have.
Okay. Second, whoever has the most barrels of wheat on hand at any given moment.
Look, actually, you're getting warm.
Okay, third, whoever wins the annual July best garden contest.
Ding, 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 ding. Honestly, you're closer than you would think with quite a few of these answers.
Okay.
So get this: in order to become a Canadian senator, let's roll back a tiny bit. So, the American system was created because America, overthrew its monarchy, the British monarchy. America forcibly separated with the British monarchy and wanted to create a system of federalism where the states couldn't be tyrannized by the central government, right? Because that was America's founding impetus. It was so that the states couldn't be bullied by a huge central power, right? So that's why the states have so much power in the Senate, right? Canada, on the other hand, was very colonial. Like English Canada was proud to be an imperial property for most of the 19th century, well into the 20th century. This dominated Canadian political discourse. And so when they created Confederation, which was, a response to many things, including the fact that in the mid-19th century, it was really hard to get stuff done in Canada because the government system had just created a lot of deadlock. And because the American Civil War was freaking everybody out, they decided to confederate all of the different provinces of Canada into provinces in British North America into one confederated country. So they created the House of Commons, which anybody could get elected to, but they were worried that all of the unwashed hobos who would get elected into the House of Commons would endanger the rights of property owners and the rights like British imperial rights. So they made the Senate in order to get into this.
I hate our country's history.
Our country's fucking idiotic, isn't it?
Like, just saying,
this is what I mean. The second you start learning about it,
a bunch of rich British people were like, well, I'm worried someone's gonna fuck with the land that I say is mine.
Yeah,
and cut to 12 years earlier when they were like, dear Red River.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Guess what?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's completely correct.
Yeah.
But get this. So these are the requirements that they made to become a Canadian senator, and they're still the requirements today. These were never updated from 1867.
Okay, lay 'em on me.
In order to become a Canadian senator, you have to own, wait for it, $4,000 worth of property.
Wow.
Which in 1867
was a ton of money.
Was would have been equivalent to six figures today. But it's still that you have to own $4,000 worth of property. So that's stupid. And you're supposed to own it in the region that you represent. Now get this.
Right.
Like in the American Senate, the Senate.
Does it have to be land property, or can it just be a thing?
It has to be $4,000 of land property, which nowadays is can you even buy $4,000 of land property? Isn't that like the penny of properties? And we got rid of our pennies.
Pressed. Yeah, I wonder if maybe this would take some lawyering, but I wonder if you could go in with a group of friends and buy a thing and be like, I own a percentage of this lot, and that equals
$4,000. I bet you could. Honestly, it's just bizarre.
Yeah.
You also have to have never, you can't declare bankruptcy while you're a senator. If you're a senator and you declare bankruptcy, you're kicked out. Yeah.
The senators get paid.
Yeah, senators get paid $137,000 a year. We'll get into that. That's part of it.
If you're going bankrupt as a senator, you're not doing it right.
No, that's part of why people are mad at them, in fact.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that in a little bit. And you have to live in the in the region that you represent. Now, so in America, each state has two senators. In Canada, in 1867, they were like, well, we want all the regions to be fairly represented. So Ontario is one region. Ontario has 24 senators.
Right.
Quebec is one region. Quebec gets 24 senators.
Okay.
The West is one region. British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba get 24 senators.
Really?
Yes. And the Maritimes are one region, which means that Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island get 24 senators. Actually, Prince Edward Island wasn't part of Confederation in 1867. So originally, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia each had 12 senators.
Right.
They gave up each gave up 2. So PEI has 4 senators, and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia each have 10. Newfoundland got 6 when it came in. Because technically British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba get 6 each. And that's how our Senate represents our regions.
If there's any, like... Okay. So, like, when I came to Ontario, I was like... Some people were like... You know, I certainly didn't come hostily or anything like that, but, you know, it comes up every now and then where I'm like, oh, yeah, like, it's reasons like this, guys, why, like, the West... feels alienated.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and then people are like, "What are you talking about?" And now you explain this to me, and I'm like, "That's
literally
like,
bullshit."
Yeah, like that's not like ignorance being said on social media. That's like lines in our government documents of the highest degree.
Right. And the way you become a senator, right? Is the prime minister picks whoever the prime minister is at the moment,
right,
gets to, without any oversight whatsoever, as long as that person has $4,000 worth of property, gets to make you a senator if there's an empty seat.
Right.
Right.
Now, okay, that leads me to my next question.
Right.
It's like the Supreme Court where the prime minister can't remove somebody, right? Like once they're in.
There's very little recourse to remove a sitting senator.
Only if they run out of money.
Yeah, right. That's right. They have to declare bankruptcy. I think the Senate itself can like freeze you out. I think the Senate can vote to kick you out, but the Senate has to do it. And a lot of the time, senators are, we'll get into this also, in trouble a lot in Canada because they're not looked at very carefully and they have the laziest job in the government in Canada, probably.
Right.
Like, I mean, maybe someone who knows about the government, like if my buddy Matt Berry ever listens to this, I'm sure he worked for a senator for a while. I'm sure he'll fill us in with the insider scoop, but
right.
It's like the average senator get paid $137,000 a year, plus they get reimbursed for all of their travel between their home place in Ottawa, which is where a lot of them get in trouble for like cooking the books on when they're doing Senate business. Right. They work an average of like 70 days a year. So they work like 3 months a year and make 130.
70? So they make like $700 a day.
Yeah. And the rest of the time they just get to chill on their, ample $4,000 lots. Most of them have a lot more property than $4,000.
Right,
let's put that out there.
That's incorrect math. $2,000 a day.
I don't know. I haven't done that. I'm unwilling to do that math.
That's like $2,000 a day.
Right. So this is why people think it's dumb, right?
Yeah.
It's because like it's a crazy system. It doesn't make any sense anymore. It's from 1867.
And what are they supposed to do?
So the purpose of a second a second house,
the upper house
is to be the phrase is a sober second thought. Okay. Right. The idea is it's to balance out the idea that the parliament represents the population. So to balance out a large majority of the population bullying a minority of the population, there should be a house that's not tied to population in order to balance things out.
Right.
So they're supposed to have different priorities and different responsibilities and look at legislature from that point of view, from the point of view of the regions, right? Now, in practice, the Canadian Senate, being keenly aware of the fact that they're not elected by anybody. And I just want to finish up this point. So the Prime Minister gets to pick who fills the Senate seat if there's one open, like in the Supreme Court.
Okay.
A senator stays a senator from the time they're appointed until they're 75 years old. So if you're appointed at 70, you serve 5 years. But there was a senator who was appointed in his like mid-30s who like, I think he had to resign in disgrace, but he had like 37 years of his Senate term left. Right. And once you're retired, you get a crazy pension.
Right. And I imagine they force you to retire.
Well, at 75, you stop.
Right.
Right. You have to stop.
75, retire. That's different than the standard, isn't it?
65 is the normal. That's right. So you last 10 years longer.
Right. So they want you to wade 10 years into craziness.
That's right.
Before.
And basically,
not that everybody goes crazy when you're 65, but let's fucking face it.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you're 65, you're not as sane as you were when you were 50.
Walk into the woods. Let a bear eat you. It's the circle of life.
Put some rocks in your pockets and walk into the ocean.
If you're not beautiful and young enough to star in a Disney Channel movie, just fucking
go sit on an ice floe. And
just push
close
yourself.
Your eyes.
Yeah, walk the long dusty trail.
Wait for time to take its course.
That's right. Anyway, I've been Richard. No.
We've lost every listener we had over 65.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, guys.
Guys, we love you.
Thanks for late capitalism and all that bullshit. Anyway, So and traditionally through Canada's history, because the Prime Minister appoints these people and they stay in there forever, and they. So they have in theory the powers of the House of Commons. The Senate doesn't propose legislation, right? It comes to them after the House of Commons. And I'll just this is the flow chart you probably saw at some point in grade 11 social studies, but a bill gets proposed in the House of Commons. It has its first reading. Then it has then it goes to committee in the House of Commons who quibble over the details of the bill. Then it gets its second reading in the House of Commons, right? So once it's been edited by the House of Commons, it gets read again. Then after that, it goes to the Senate. The Senate reads it, right, makes edits on it, sometimes sends it back for a third reading, and then it gets voted on. That's how the process that a bill takes.
Right.
Stick figure version of.
Here's a question. Mm-hmm. In that moment, because I'm all for transparency, when the Senate makes edits to the bill,
right,
I imagine they draw attention to those edits.
Yeah, that's the point.
So
of
it's
those
not
edits.
it's not like
it's not
they send it
shifty.
to the Senate and the Senate sends it back and you're like, okay, now we got to reread this and see what they changed.
And one of the things about the Senate is because it's completely unaccountable to the people, the senators have tended to tread lightly because they are acutely aware that they're it's such a stale and weird institution that if they start, in theory, they have the ability to block any legislation that they want, right? They can say, no, this isn't good enough and knock it down. And they have a few times in their history. But in practice, they don't usually deny legislation because they know that they don't have a democratic mandate and that they're one muscle flex away from just a mob storming them with pitchforks and murdering them all, right? The public faith in the Senate is really low in Canada, and generally it's everyone's always talking about changing it or abolishing it altogether, and there's not a lot of good faith in them, so they tread lightly, right? Usually the Senate is more of they've evolved to become less of an upper house like in the States where it's you have to win the votes in the Senate to get legislation. That's not what our vibe is up in Canada. We don't have that dynamic. Instead, the senators divide into committees on specific issues and kind of become experts on certain issues. And so they're more of a technical eye, a bureaucratic eye. They do a lot of research. You could sit on the natural gas and oil committee or whatever, the natural resources committee. So then you spend your time in the Senate becoming an expert on natural resources. So you're the person in the legislative chain who knows all the shit about oil and gas. So when the legislation comes to you, you can look at it and you actually really know the numbers. You understand all the policies. That's the theory, and that's kind of, in our current form, the best case scenario of the Senate. That's one of the best things about it right now, is that it does have these people who
are experts,
and they're not obligated to run for re-election, so they don't have that same pressure. They're not trying to pass flashy legislation to impress people.
Which leads me to actually a question that I've been mulling for the last little bit is, now my understanding with Congress and issues I take with it seems to be really party based, of people stick with their party and
No,
Congress.
Right,
I mean
party.
American Congress.
Right. That's actually not true.
That's not true.
I mean, not compared to many systems.
Oh, okay.
In Congress, sometimes people break with their parties, right? And if you can convince other people, right now we're in a very partisan moment in America. The Democrats and Republicans aren't collaborating on very much stuff, but historically and recently in America, it's very possible that a couple of Democratic congressmen or senators will break with their party and vote certain ways on stuff, often in result to corporate lobbying, they get money to vote on certain things. Canada, by contrast, has almost total party discipline, right?
Okay.
You do not vote against your party in the Canadian Parliament.
Right.
That never happens.
Right.
It's really rare.
And so I guess what I would ask is, if we were to reform our Senate, how would we make sure we protect that and make sure, because if you're then, because as you said, the thing that's nice is nobody's running for re-election. So
right.
Everybody is able to, like, quote unquote, focus on, like, on their responsibility and not worry about being a politician. They can just worry on policy.
Right. And that's the best case scenario for
and so
them.
how do you protect that while also reforming the way they're brought in?
Well, some people think you don't need to protect it. Or like, well, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I'm trying to just think of what to say first. Alberta was the hotbed of anti-Senate thought, as you can tell already. Like you mentioned before we started, your dad doesn't like the Senate. Albertans really don't like the Senate. Right. The reason Alberta specifically doesn't like it comes from 1979, when Pierre Trudeau created the National Energy Program, which I'm sure you've heard of. Oh, yes. It's like the Albertan Alamo.
Yeah. It's the big old finger.
Yeah, that's right.
Threw the finger up.
So for those who aren't angry, that's not what Just Watch Me was about. Wasn't it? That was the War Measures Act.
Oh, the finger was
the National Energy Program. Yeah. For those who don't know that story, it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Okay, well, the 1970s globally obviously was a bad time for oil prices. There were a series of oil crises, right? And the price of oil was like really elastic and caused all kinds of economic crises across the world.
Yeah.
And in response to that, Pierre Trudeau created what was called the National Energy Program, where he took some of the profits from Alberta oil companies and nationalized them, right? And tried to spread them, basically took wealth from Alberta's oil companies and brought it to Ontario and Quebec, brought it east, and then also like created a price fixing system for the price of oil. And this was in place from 1980 to 1985, and Albertans bitterly hated it. They thought it was just a total cash grab from the government. I mean, I think the number is somewhere between $50 and $100 billion was taken over those 5 years. And then they started to feel that if the Senate was doing its actual job, the senators could have blocked that from happening, something that was perceived as so unfair to their region, right? The East versus the West. This was a regional divide in Canada.
Yeah.
So there began talk about how to reform the Senate to make it an effective body. Now, we talked just now about how senators not being accountable was kind of a positive right now because they're not pressured to do flashy things and they're not able to be lobbied the same way.
Yeah.
But it's also dangerous, right? Because they
accountable.
risk becoming an oligarchy, right?
Right.
They risk completely running the country, and we have no ways to get rid of them. Like Rob Ford, remember the Rob Ford thing? Like we couldn't. That guy was smoking crack and like punching cameras with his head, and like stumbling over drunk at Taste of the Grand Danforth with like 6 tzatziki all over his fucking shirt, and we can't get rid of him because we don't have an impeachment mechanism for a mayor, right? Can you imagine if Rob Ford had a term until he was 75 years old?
Yeah.
Right, that's an easy nightmare scenario to see, right?
Yeah.
If senators start to actually control things.
Well, God took care of that.
Yeah. Honestly, I would donate to a church if I thought God killed Rob Ford. I'll say it.
Oh my God.
He would say the same thing about me, that motherfucker.
You're right. I got no love for Rob. But it's funny because when that actually happened, when it turned out he had cancer, that was the first thought that came to my mind. Was like, like so there cosmic justice.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's someone's listening.
That guy was such an asshole.
Yeah.
Anyway. So out of this National Energy Program debacle came this term called the Triple E Senate. This was, I want to say, Joe Clark's. One of the things Joe Clark was all about, Ralph Klein, like these kind of 80s Alberta Western guys.
Yeah.
The Triple E Senate stands for equal, elected, and effective, right? That was the buzzword. And there was a big push to create a new system of Senate reform where the senators would be elected. They would actually start doing their jobs. Because they were elected, they could actually start exercising their power. They would be a legislative body like the House of Commons. They'd be as important as the House of Commons. And to rebalance the stupid distribution of seats to to make the provinces more equal than they are now, because the way they divided it like doesn't make like no one views Canada in those terms anymore.
No, that's really bizarre.
Isn't that just kind of, and as we know, we're both Westerners too.
How does that happen, Richard? How does it happen that like it's because I feel like we've updated a lot of other laws.
Yeah.
So like how does it happen that law is so antiquated that it's still like it's never been
Canada's
bothered.
a constitutionally lazy country.
Yeah.
Like we had to, like basically Canada didn't write down a lot of its laws. Like this is the thing about Canada. It just kind of it operated a lot on what's called constitutional convention, which means no, this isn't actually a written down rule, but we just do it this way and nobody doesn't do it this way. So because of that, why do we need to write it down? An example of this is like Canada until 1982, when Pierre Trudeau changed the constitution the second time. Canada's constitution has two parts. The first is the Constitution Act of 1867, which was when we confederated. It used to be called the British North America Act. And it also has Constitution Act 1982, which is when Pierre Trudeau did a bunch of changes, including what's the most famous is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was introduced in 1982.
Okay.
As well as in 1982, we formally said we don't have to ask the British Parliament for permission to pass every law we pass anymore, which was still a thing until 1982. And it was a technicality, like they wouldn't, because like they wouldn't block anything anymore.
Right. But
it was on the books. We still had to, once we passed the law, we had the last step was to go ask the British Parliament to pass it for us.
Hey, Your Majesty.
Yes.
It's me again. Listen, we're gonna go ahead and send these things down to the mail room. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
go ahead.
it's also worth saying
whether you said yes or no, honestly.
Yeah.
But law says got to give you a call.
Let's
how you doing?
Let's take a little detour here too to say that like other former British colonies like Australia and New Zealand have reformed their senates into elected senates, or like they have accountability measures. They've changed them to be more like real legislative bodies. But the British system is still fucking batshit, because the British has the House of Commons as their lower house, right? And the House of Lords as their upper house.
They gotta rebrand that.
Yeah.
They gotta.
Dude, well, get this. Like, the House of Lords is like not elected at all, right? It's like, and it's an appointed house, but there's also like, there's still it's one of two upper houses in the world where it's bigger than the lower house. It's like, I think the House of Commons in Britain has like 300 something members. The House of Lords has like 800 members, so it's way bigger than the lower house. It still has 90 seats that are like hereditary. So like it's like they're passed by title. Like if the guy who's in the seat dies, his like son takes the seat. It has like a bunch of seats still for like high-ranking clergy members. And get this, like women were on the books banned from being members of the House of Lords until like the early 60s.
Right. Well, that does make sense.
Yeah.
Because then it's not the House of Ladies.
No, that's right. House of Lords.
House of Lords. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I'd love to have you in here. Yeah. But see the sign?
I'm sorry. Yeah. My hands are tied. And also, so are yours now. You're going to jail. There's actually this dope British MP named Tony Benn who like his father was also in government, and his father was given like a knighthood or like a viscountship. I don't know what the fuck these terms are. He was given a lordship in the 40s, and when his father died, the lordship passed to him and to Tony Benn. And in the 60s, and Tony Benn was a member of the House of Commons, but because he received his lordship, he couldn't be in the House of Commons anymore. He had to go into the House of Lords. And so he fought a campaign to renounce his own lordship to stay in the House of Commons. Oh my god! Like that, like that's how crazy their system is. Fucking just wild.
Actually, when I was just over there recently, some friends of mine were like telling me little fucked things about their government. Yeah. I was like, you guys, you're
still doing what?
So fucked.
Your economic policy is like they cut open a chicken.
Yeah.
They like throw its guts on the wall. And they're like, it looks like Bulgaria.
Invest in Bulgaria.
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, here's a fun, just because we're sort of half on the topic. Yeah. And it's a nice segue. When I was in London, my friend was telling me about RP accent. Like, do you know where the RP accent comes from?
Right.
Do you know?
I don't know.
It's where so the RP accent is based on the Queen's accent.
RP stands for received pronunciation.
Yes.
For those who don't know, who didn't go to nerd theater school like us,
Yeah.
and it means that like nobody has it as a natural accent.
No, you have to train it in.
It's received.
And the reason, and so the Queen speaks very properly, like this, all very tight and in and close. And the reason is because they were German, and when they came over, they were German, learned to speak with a British accent, and now this is how it is. And now everybody who's upper class also speaks like this.
Right.
And so it's like nobody in England ever spoke that way. It's a bunch of Germans came in, learned to speak British, and then everyone pretended like that was the way that it was supposed to go.
All kinds of, like, that's why, you know, our aristocracies are so dumb.
Yeah.
Like, monarchies are so dumb. Like, you know, by the time it got to, like, the Habsburgs in Austria, who were, like, so inbred and stupid, they had all these, like, horrible jaw deformities and, like, physical problems because they were all so inbred. It's, like, this, like, you know, this ruler prince with, like, the mental age of 2.5, like, loves, like, puppy dogs. And so, like, suddenly, like, the cool thing is, like, everyone has, like, you know, is, like, wearing shirts with puppy dogs on them because they're, like, idiot inbred ruler, like, loves puppy dog shirts, and everyone's, like, so classy.
Yeah, that's also where the British accent with the soft R's comes from. So, like,
really?
Wajo and Wadawik, and it's a British lord had a speech impediment, and everyone around him adopted the speech impediment so as not to make him feel alienated. So now there are people that grow up with this strange accent and can't pronounce their O's, and
like the politics of existing under a monarchy are basically the politics of high school.
Yeah,
like
it's so weird.
Like all the insecurities of high school writ large.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except with more pikes.
Yeah.
Actually,
Well,
I went to a pretty
depends on-
pikey high school.
Yeah, I was going to say, depends on how adept with metaphor you are, because at my high school, there were lots of pikes.
Word
Yeah.
pikes.
Yeah. Boner pikes.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
now.
you know what I mean?
Penises.
Yeah.
You're referring to the way that you were a young hormonal teenage boy and you were horny all the time.
Yeah, that's what we call a callback.
Returning to the Canadian Senate.
The who?
Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at today. Oh, and I should say the Triple E Senate, that's what we were talking about. So there was a big movement to reform the Senate. It culminated in the Charlottetown Accord, which you've probably heard of. Also, that was Brian Mulroney's big attempt to also reform the Constitution.
Brian Mulroney being the host of Canadian Idol.
That's right, yeah. He drank some fucking youth elixir and came back to haunt us for a second generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Brian Mulroney's his attempt to change the Constitution, which failed, so it did not succeed. And since then, Senate reform it's like electoral reform. It's floating around all the time. People don't like the Senate, but if it ain't that broke, don't fix it, maybe, is a lot of people's attitude. Like, it's a hassle. It's going to require, in order to change the Senate, you need to have a vote in the House of Commons pass and the approval of 7 out of 10 provinces, which also include 50% of the population of Canada. So it's like a big national change that has to happen.
So you're saying Justin Trudeau is talking about changing it? Here's a question.
Yes.
If Justin Trudeau is talking about changing it, what are the odds that he actually gives a shit versus wants to win some support in Alberta?
Here's an interesting thing. He has actually started changing it, and nobody's talking about it.
Right.
So far he's actually really walked the walk on this one. He's done everything he said he was going to do, but nobody seems to care. It's also not clear exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
So here's a bit of background. In the last couple of years, the Senate has really been taking heat because of what first was called the Senate expenses scandal. Well, you'll remember this a little bit, but what happened was
a bunch of people had like hotel bills that were like
so starting in 2014, it came to light that a bunch of senators, it's a requirement that you own property in your whatever region you represent. In some places,
$4,000 worth.
That's right, $4,000 worth at least. In some places, like in Quebec, they actually have 24 regions, and each senator has property in one of those 24 regions. But in other places, it's like not formal like that. And the government will reimburse you for travel between. You're supposed to technically live in that place, right? You're not supposed to live in Ottawa, and then also live, and then have it as like, yeah, I own a house there, but I live in Ottawa. Really, it's like you're supposed to actually live outside of Ottawa in the place you live and then go to Ottawa for business, right? So basically what they found was a shitload of senators were doing it the other way. They were spending tons of their time in Ottawa, basically just living in Ottawa, but then claiming that this other place was their main residence, and then claiming all kinds of expenses associated with it. A lot of them were claiming travel that had nothing to do with business. Like there was one senator, Pamela Wallin, who she would fly from her riding, which I think is in Alberta, to Ottawa, but she'd always go through Toronto, and she'd claim the Toronto parts also as Senate business, which doesn't make sense, right? So what they found was, so there's 105 Senate seats. They found 30 senators with bad expense claims.
Right.
Some of them like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money being paid out to these people on top of their salaries, right? These were reimbursements they were getting on top of their salaries.
Right.
4 senators received criminal charges. 9 more were recommended for criminal charges. There was like tons of scandal. This really embroiled the Harper government because like one of the dudes, Mike Duffy, who's a PEI senator, he owed like $90,000, and like Harper's chief of staff cut him a check to pay it back. Right. So like he paid it back, but it was like it came from
the government.
Yeah. And then he got kicked out of the Conservative caucus. Right. So we haven't talked about this dynamic yet, actually. So when you're appointed by the prime minister to be a senator, generally prime ministers appoint like people from their party who have served their time, or they appoint donors from their party to, have a cushy train on the Senate. And generally, if you like a liberal prime minister appoints you, you are a liberal senator for your whole term, right? So it's really advantageous if a bunch of Senate seats come up for you, because if you appoint a bunch of young senators into the Senate, they're going to be there for like 35 years, right? So the liberals have had a majority in the Senate for decades because of this dynamic. And those people are, even though they're not elected, they meet and sit with the Liberals in the House of Commons. They're all part of one big caucus, right? This has caused trouble sometimes, like when Brian Mulroney passed the GST and brought the GST into effect. The Liberal senators who had a majority struck it down. It was one of the only times that they've ever done that in history. And they said, no, it's too big an issue. Just because you have a majority, like this isn't going to be an election issue. We're forcing an election on this issue. We're not going to let it pass until the people speak kind of about it.
Well, that sounds responsible.
Yeah, but then again, it's like liberals have had a majority in the parliament for decades.
Right.
Now, when Justin Trudeau was
in the Senate,
that's what I meant. Yeah. When Justin Trudeau was still running for election and Harper was taking shitloads of heat about this, Justin Trudeau made this kind of big move where he expelled all of the Liberal senators from the party caucus and made them all be independents. So they weren't technically Liberals anymore. Some of them were like, we're still the Liberals even if you don't want us, and they formed their own little like mini Liberal caucus of senators. But then a lot of them sat as independents. And this is Justin Trudeau's solution for the Senate. He wants all of them to be independents. So he's trying to get rid of party-affiliated senators and wants each senator to be like their own independent person.
Would you go so far as to say that this is Justin Trudeau's final solution for the Senate?
I honestly thought you were going to say this is Justin Trudeau's Independence Day.
Independence Day.
Yeah. Yeah, sort of. It's his solution. It's his Senate Holocaust. Yeah, that's right. So Justin, since then, Justin Trudeau has said he was going to. It used to be the prime minister could appoint anybody, right? And this caused all kinds of shifty shit, like generally it's accepted that 1 or 2 senators can be in cabinet, right? They can be like the head legislative person of a particular government agency. If, for example, the Conservatives get elected into a parliamentary minority and they're trying to make their cabinet and they don't have anybody from Quebec, they can take a Conservative senator from Quebec, right? And just so that there's a Quebec voice in their government. Now, Harper, who originally campaigned on Senate reform when he first got elected,
those 6 decades ago.
Yeah, it was 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
No, it was in 2006.
Right.
He campaigned about he's like the Senate, it's unaccountable and corrupt. And then literally the first thing he did was he took a guy who had lost his election, appointed him to the Senate, and then made him a minister, right? Like that's the kind of shifty thing you can do, right? So Justin Trudeau, one of the things he said he would do was he would create a committee, and then people could apply to be senators to the committee, and he would choose from the people who applied instead of just picking people, which he did. He did that this year. There was a committee. Now he creates the whole committee, right? So there was a committee created, 2,700 people applied for like 21 Senate seats or something like that. The committee recommended 5 people for each seat, and he picked people. Now, it's a totally opaque process still. So at the end of the day, he still gets to pick anyone he wants, whether they come from the committee or not. We're not sure if the people he did pick came from the committee or not. And they do seem to be like a lot of Liberal Party sort of people, but he made them all sit as independents. And because he appointed all of these independent senators now have a plurality in the Senate. They're the largest single group, more than liberals and conservatives.
Wow.
So this has a lot of weird implications for the Senate. Like, is it going to make senators less beholden to their parties? Those people did all still get appointed by Trudeau, right? Is that a good thing? I don't know. Is it a good thing for us to have individual people who aren't actually accountable to the regions they supposedly represent, whose only removal mechanism comes from being voted out by their own house, controlling our legislature? Like, I'm not sure.
Right.
This is a big change Justin Trudeau has made, but it's very under the radar.
Right.
He only did this in November, so it's 5 months
Why is
old.
it so under the radar?
I think it's because this thing happened where Donald Trump got elected the president of the United States in November of 2016 also.
Right,
and so people were like, wait, there's a bunch of new independents on the Canadian Senate? You know, like, there was a committee formed to take applications.
Yeah, Justin Trudeau just wrapped an Islamic baby in a burrito and took a bite.
Yeah, that's right. Donald Trudeau is fucking doing coke off Melania's back on the White House lawn. Like, nobody gives a shit about the Canadian Senate right now.
He is playing helicopter polo with
with
Bashir al-Assad.
That's right. Yeah. Ugh. Anyway, so that's probably it. Got lost in the shuffle of that, and there's not really been a lot of news about it since then. I mean, right now though, the senators are in the news again, and they're getting in trouble. Right now, at this moment, this fucking woman Lynn Bayak, who's a senator, was the one who said that it's too bad we don't focus on all the good things that residential schools did. And then she doubled down on that and was like, I understand why natives like native pain, because I went on a double date with a native person in like high school or something. She's fucking crazy. That's what I mean. It's like, these are the people who are on the Senate until they're 75. There's also a senator right now who has a statutory rape charge against him. And he's being asked to resign.
Every now and then I feel like I pop my head up from my go for a hole of like idealist leftism, and like, you know, I'm like, we're digging through the earth being like, real change is happening, and like there are good people all around, and I pop my head up and exactly.
And get this, you know how I said there's the committees that are like, you specialize in a topic and your job is to like look over legislation, right? That woman is on the Aboriginal Affairs Committee.
Well, she got removed from that.
She got kicked off it, yes. But that's what that is. Her job, she was one of the people whose job it was to be an expert about Aboriginal affairs and review legislation. Right. And her opinion is that we didn't do enough to focus on the good things that happened in residential schools. This is why
Lynn Beck, if you're listening to this, you can go fuck yourself.
Please come on the podcast. We want to interview you, and B, please walk immediately into a tree and die.
Walk into a tree.
Like, figure it out, Lynn. Connect those dots. I'm not going to tell you how to do it.
You on the case.
We're putting a task in front of you. You just pick that up and run with it. Possibly literally into a tree. Very hard.
Residential schools would be a good topic for this podcast.
Yeah, I would really like to do a truth and reconciliation episode. I'm sure we will. It's one of the most important issues in Canadian politics.
Great.
And you know, whenever we want to really lighten the mood, we'll go into that stuff. So you know, we said that some of the good that came from it was that these people aren't dependent on flashy election year stuff, and they become experts in their topics. The risk is you get a fucking crazy person and there's no way to get rid of them. Right. Like Lynn Bayak, who has refused to resign from the Senate, right? Like, she refused to resign.
And she can just refuse.
And she can just not resign. the senators have to vote her out. But if the senators are gun shy to vote somebody out,
Right.
And even when there's this one senator,
But
Patrick Brazeau.
isn't this a good reason for the Senate to get together and get this person out? Because, like you said, are they drawing too much attention to themselves right now?
Yeah, maybe. But they almost never do it. It almost never gets that far. In any situation where a senator is probably going to get voted out because they've done something bad, they resign, and their pensions are worth like $5 million. So then they get a huge payout. If they resign, they still keep their pension.
Right.
So like Patrick Brazeau.
Why wouldn't you get, as soon as I got the Senate seat, I would resign?
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything. I think you have to serve a minimum term. After you serve a minimum term, you get a pension. If you're an MP,
70 days.
I think it's 6 years. If you serve 6 years as an MP, you get a pension. I think it's like some similar for a senator.
Right.
But like Patrick Brazeau, who was the guy who fought Justin Trudeau in that boxing match, was a senator. He had a domestic abuse charge leveled against him, as well as expense charges, like bad expense charges, and he ended up resigning and got his pension.
Wow.
When it looked like he was going to get voted out. This is why people don't like it. There's quite a few reasons it's bad.
Yeah, that's fucked.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, I am a big fan of Senate reform. I think Senate reform could be really interesting. We mentioned it in our electoral reform episode, which you should check out. But in the German system, the House of Commons is decided by plurality, and their upper house is decided by proportional representation, which is an interesting idea, I think. There's all kinds of ways to improve the upper house to give more regional representation. Oh, Alberta insisted after the National Energy Program on having elections for its senators. And even though there was no rule on the books that said the prime minister had to listen to them, they still did it. And the prime minister generally was like, it's not worth pissing you guys off over this. So they generally appointed whoever was elected. Voted. And Alberta had 7 or 8 Senate elections. They had one every 7 years. They elected a senator. And that senator moved aside after 7 years, except some people won more than one term. And that just expired on December 31st, the law about the electing senators in Alberta. And the NDP didn't renew it because the NDP believes in Senate abolition. That's their official policy. So they were like, we don't care about electing senators because we think the Senate's bullshit. We want to get rid of it completely. So we're just not going to put any effort into maintaining this law. Right. The Senate elections in Alberta were also not very well attended and not cared about by a lot of people, it seemed.
Right. Yeah, well, that's actually kind of exciting because I don't often think of my homeland of Alberta being super progressive generally, but that's kind of a cool thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, in this area,
it
was like an isolationist thing, right? It was like, we're not getting our rights.
Right.
We're Alberta. You guys are fucking us over, which is an Alberta thing for sure.
Yeah.
But in this case, their priorities lined up with making the government a more fair and transparent system, a more accountable system. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And that's why we hate the Senate. Da 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 da. Fuck the Senate. It is so bad. It is so bad. Go die, Limbeyak. Not actually CSIS. I'm sorry for saying that Limbeyak should go die. I'm not threatening her.
That's not a threat. We asked her to walk into a tree and work it out on her own.
I'm just putting the ball in her court.
That's right. That's right. Very similar to how the FBI put the ball in the court of the man who shot Malcolm X.
That's right. That's right. We're just like the FBI in that way.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe do you have anything else to add? Is it time to summate?
I mean, I think it might be time to summate. That's where we're at today. The independents now sit as the largest body in the Senate. It's not clear what effect that's going to have. This is new territory for us.
Right.
And no one's paying attention to it. So let's keep an eye.
Okay. So the Canadian Senate created in 1867 along with Confederation. I imagine in the same package of files.
Yeah, the Constitution Act 1867.
As soon as Canada became a confederation, the Senate so existed. to be a senator, you need to own $4,000 worth of property.
Oh, how am I going to do it?
You need to live in the area in which you're representing.
Yeah.
And there was a third thing, wasn't there?
You can't go bankrupt. You can't have a felony charged against you. There's like a couple other things like that.
Yeah.
Those ones kind of make sense.
Those are given. I feel.
Not the bankruptcy one, actually. That one does. That's just a property owner thing.
Yeah. I think poor people should be allowed to be politicians.
Fuck yes.
That would have been a wildly radical thing to say back in 1867.
Yeah, but so would. Hi, my name's Richard Lamb. I'm half Chinese.
Yeah.
Like,
get out to the plains.
Yeah. Isn't there a railroad you should be building?
You half breed.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Senate created in 1867. Their purpose is a sober second thought to our House of Commons. So,
yes.
like the House of Commons, all MPs elected by riding, and the Senate represents province.
Yeah.
There are 24 senators in Ontario, 24 senators in Montreal, 24 or in Quebec, and 24 senators in the West.
Yeah, that's
actually,
correct.
and I think on the original document it would probably say
"Here be dragons."
Yeah, the untamed West.
Yeah, that's right.
Beyond the Métis settlement.
Yeah, Jamie and I are both Westerners. I don't know if that dynamic has literally never come into play on this podcast until this moment, but both of us are like, this is bullshit.
So the Senate takes a look at, so bills go through the House of Commons, get voted on, or get read aloud, analyzed within the House of Commons, sent up to the Senate for rejigging or just to be smacked down generally,
right?
And then can go through, once they're all is processed, they can go through into law.
That's right.
Yeah, we do. There are, what else can I say? There are lots of, the senators work only 70 days a year, make $137,000, have beautiful pensions after X amount of time.
They get a shitload of their travel and expenses paid for, which causes them a lot of trouble because a third of them were doing it wrong and getting more money than they should.
Yeah, they're signed by the Prime Minister, not elected. And yeah, is a very antiquated system, but it could be upgraded, I think, to an effective modern system, which Justin Trudeau is attempting to do as we speak.
Yeah, but he's attempting to do it using his powers unilaterally without changing the structure of the Constitution, because that would require him to get 7 provinces, which represent more than 50% of the population, on side. In order to abolish the Senate, he needs unanimous consent of all provinces and territories.
Right. The Senate itself are often even though they have the responsibility of going over bills and stuff like that, they often truly flex their muscles so as not to draw attention to themselves.
Yeah, they don't often.
Yeah, they really are happy that you don't know that they exist.
Yeah, that's really their gravy train.
Yeah, they are very satisfied that you don't give a shit. Justin Trudeau is trying to reform it right now. It should be making more news, but it is an incredibly dry and boring topic, and also, there's lots of excitement in the world right now that it's a lot more like flashy and cool, so we're not paying much attention. Is there anything else super pertinent I'm missing? I got a lot out of it, but that's the stuff.
No,
that
man, that's pretty good.
My head.
That's real good.
Yeah, well then, great. I think now that I know what it is, I'm going to be a lot less afraid of reading articles that come through my Facebook feed, because every now and then they come through and I'm like, Senate, what's that? I don't want to read that. So that's
good. That is the point of this podcast, is to give you that bump of information so that when you see those articles, you can
have an
read
opinion.
them.
Build an opinion.
That's right. You can just read the article as where it is. You don't have to constantly be going back and filling in all these blanks that you don't understand.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Sweet, man.
Oh. Now I know what the Senate is.
What a special day.
Yeah. Sorry, Mrs. Greaves, my grade 5 social studies teacher.
Do you remember where you were when you first learned what the Senate is, Dad? This is, I don't know what this bit is.
Oh, is it?
Let's bail on this bit.
You're just riding.
I'm pulling the ripcord on the bit.
Landed safely on the ground. Nobody died.
All right.
Nobody died in this podcast.
So, Except Lynn Bayak.
Except Lynn Bayak.
Hopefully.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, that's up to you, Lynn.
Yeah.
Do what you got to do.
Yeah. We have given you all the tools you need.
I'm just saying. You'd really make my day. Okay, so that's the podcast for this week.
Amazing. If you like it, please like it on Facebook. Subscribe to us on Facebook or SoundCloud. Facebook being Explain It to Jamie. SoundCloud being Explain It to Jamie. Twitter at Explain Jamie. You can email us, Gmail, explainittojamie@gmail.com. You
can find us on Facebook.
You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on SoundCloud. You can find us on Gmail.
You can find us in real life.
You can find us in real life.
You can find us on virtual life, Second Life.
Second Life.
You can find us in World of Warcraft.
On Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, Gmail.
You said all these things already.
Real life.
Why are you spooling back? Are we in a glitch in the Matrix?
Yeah, if you have any thoughts, if you'd like to say something that maybe we forgot to say.
Yeah, any comments, any feedback whatsoever, send them our way. We'll address them in a future Double Dip episode, which are our bonus episodes where we revisit topics.
Yeah. Yeah, please stay connected. Share, like, subscribe. And stay woke, folks. Stay woke.
I'm Richard.
I'm Jamie. This is Explain It to Jamie.
Woo! Woohoo!